He invited her onto the stage to entertain the crowd. Less than an hour later, she would become the reason nobody in the room could speak. The grand ballroom of the Charleston Chess Classic glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected warm light across rows of spectators, reporters, sponsors, and elite players from around the country. At the center of it all sat Grandmaster Richard Sterling, one of the most celebrated chess players in America. At 61 years old, with silver hair, an expensive navy suit, and decades of championship victories behind him, Sterling carried himself with the confidence of a man who rarely encountered surprises. Hundreds of guests had gathered to watch his exhibition match, a popular event where audience members could challenge the Grandmaster for a few entertaining moves before inevitably losing. Laughter flowed easily through the room. Cameras flashed. Conversations filled the air. It was exactly the kind of attention Richard Sterling enjoyed. Then his eyes drifted toward the back row. Sitting quietly near the wall was a woman almost nobody had noticed. Maya Carter wore a simple brown cardigan over a plain blouse. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back. A worn tote bag rested beside her chair. While others leaned forward hoping to be seen, Maya seemed perfectly content remaining invisible. She watched the games with calm interest, occasionally smiling, but never drawing attention to herself. To most people, she looked like someone who had wandered into the event out of curiosity. Richard noticed her immediately because she appeared so different from everyone else. "How about our quiet guest in the back?" he announced into the microphone. Several heads turned. Maya looked up, surprised. The crowd followed his gesture. "Would you like to join me for a game?" Richard asked with a playful smile. A few spectators chuckled. The invitation sounded generous, but there was something else beneath it. Maya hesitated. "I think I am fine where I am," she replied politely. More laughter drifted through the ballroom. Richard smiled wider. "Come on," he said. "It will be fun. I promise not to make it too difficult." The room laughed again. Maya remained still for a moment before quietly standing. She picked up her tote bag and began walking toward the stage. Nobody paid much attention to her except as part of the entertainment. Several audience members exchanged amused looks. One reporter lowered his camera, assuming the next few minutes would be predictable. But as Maya approached the chessboard, something unusual happened. An elderly international master seated near the front suddenly straightened in his chair. His eyes narrowed. He studied Maya's face carefully, as if trying to remember something. The expression on his face changed. Not shock. Recognition. Across the room, another veteran player also seemed strangely attentive. Maya reached the table and sat down opposite Richard Sterling. She folded her hands calmly in her lap. There was no nervousness in her posture, no excitement, no desire for attention, just quiet composure. Richard interpreted it as confidence born from ignorance. He had seen it many times before. People underestimated how difficult chess truly was. What he could not know was that several people in that ballroom were beginning to wonder if they had seen Maya Carter somewhere before. And as the pieces were arranged across the board and the crowd settled into expectant silence, a mystery far greater than the game itself was about to begin. Long before anyone in the Charleston ballroom knew her name, Maya Carter spent her days in a place where nobody cared about ratings, trophies, or championships. On most mornings, she arrived at the Charleston Community Library just before 8 o'clock, carrying the same worn tote bag and greeting the same familiar faces. Children rushed toward the reading corner. Retirees searched for history books. College students occupied quiet tables preparing for exams. Maya helped all of them with the same patient smile. At 34 years old, she had built a life so ordinary that it was almost invisible. Her small apartment sat above a bakery on a quiet street. She drove an aging sedan. She wore simple clothes. Most people who knew her would have described her as kind, dependable, and reserved. Nothing about her suggested greatness. Nothing about her hinted at extraordinary talent. And that was exactly how Maya wanted it. Every afternoon, after finishing her shift at the library, she walked through a nearby park before heading home. Children played basketball on outdoor courts. Dog owners chatted beneath oak trees. Office workers hurried past while checking their phones. Maya often sat on the same bench overlooking a small pond. She enjoyed the quiet. She enjoyed being unnoticed. Years earlier, she had learned that attention could become a burden. Peace was much easier to live with. Yet there were small details people rarely noticed. Sometimes she carried a notebook filled with strange diagrams and symbols. Sometimes she paused beside public chess tables where elderly men played casual games. She never joined them. She only watched for a few moments before continuing on her way. The players assumed she was curious. None of them realized she could analyze most positions within seconds. Back at the Charleston Chess Classic, Maya sat calmly across from Grandmaster Richard Sterling while hundreds of spectators observed what they believed would be a brief exhibition. The contrast between them seemed almost comical. Sterling represented fame, prestige, and accomplishment. Maya appeared to be an ordinary visitor selected at random. Several audience members smiled knowingly. They expected a quick lesson, a harmless spectacle. Near the front row, however, the elderly international master who had reacted earlier continued studying Maya with growing concentration. The longer he looked, the more unsettled he became. A distant memory lingered at the edge of recognition. Somewhere in the past, he had seen those eyes before. Somewhere he had watched that same calm expression across a chessboard. Meanwhile, Maya quietly adjusted a pawn that had been placed slightly off-center. The movement was small and almost invisible. Yet one of the tournament arbiters noticed the precision of the gesture. Experienced players often treated chess pieces differently than casual enthusiasts. It was a habit developed over thousands of games. The arbiter glanced at Maya again, curious now. Around them, conversations continued. Cameras remained focused on Sterling. Nobody paid attention to the woman in the simple cardigan. Nobody except a handful of people who were beginning to feel that something about this scene did not fit the story everyone assumed they were watching. And as the final preparations were completed and the first move approached, the mystery surrounding Maya Carter grew deeper with every passing second. The ballroom grew noticeably louder as Maya settled into her chair. Spectators leaned toward one another, sharing predictions that sounded more like certainties than guesses. Several people estimated she would last 5 moves. Others generously offered 10. The master of ceremonies smiled into the microphone and reminded everyone that even highly skilled club players struggled against Grandmaster Richard Sterling. The implication was clear. The woman in the simple cardigan had little chance. Richard seemed to enjoy the atmosphere. He rested comfortably in his chair, exchanging light-hearted remarks with audience members while photographers continued capturing images. His confidence was understandable. For decades, he had faced champions, prodigies, and international contenders. The woman seated across from him appeared to belong to an entirely different world. "How often do you play?" Richard asked casually as the audience listened. Maya looked at the board before answering. "Not as often as I used to." A few people laughed softly. The answer sounded harmless, almost modest. Richard smiled. "Well, hopefully we can make this enjoyable." More laughter followed. Maya simply nodded. She seemed completely unaffected by the attention. The arbiter signaled that the exhibition could begin. Richard reached forward and made the first move. Cameras clicked immediately. Maya studied the position for only a moment before responding. Her hand moved smoothly and confidently. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just a clean, precise move. Richard barely noticed. The opening continued. Another move from Richard. Another response from Maya. Then another. And another. To most spectators, everything appeared normal. Yet near the front row, the elderly international master who had been watching Maya narrowed his eyes further. Something about her rhythm felt familiar. Experienced players often revealed themselves not through flashy decisions, but through timing. Maya was not thinking like a casual participant. She was processing positions with remarkable efficiency. Several moves later, Richard glanced at the board with slightly more attention than before. It was not concern. Not yet. More curiosity. Maya had chosen an opening line that few recreational players knew well. Still, he remained relaxed. Across the room, a pair of tournament experts quietly exchanged looks. One leaned closer and whispered something. The other immediately sat upright. Their attention never left the board. Meanwhile, the audience continued treating the match as entertainment. Some checked their phones. Others chatted softly. They expected the game to follow a familiar script. What they failed to notice was that the tone around the board had already begun to change. Maya remained calm. Richard remained confident. Yet the space between them felt different now. More focused. More serious. Then Maya made another move. It was not dramatic. It was not aggressive. In fact, many spectators barely registered it. But the elderly international master suddenly inhaled sharply. His eyes widened. A memory finally surfaced. Years ago, at a national youth championship, he had watched a young girl dismantle elite players using the exact same positional ideas. The realization struck him like a flash of light. He turned toward Maya and stared in disbelief. Around him, nobody understood what he had just recognized. But as Richard looked down at the board and spent several seconds longer than before considering his next move, the first tiny crack appeared in the story everyone thought they were watching. Richard Sterling made his next move carefully. For the first time since the exhibition began, he no longer looked at Maya as a source of entertainment. He looked at the board. The distinction was subtle, but several experienced players noticed it immediately. The Grandmaster's relaxed posture had changed. His smile appeared less often. His eyes lingered longer over each position. Around the ballroom, conversations gradually faded. Spectators who had been checking their phones now found themselves watching the game more closely. They could sense a shift even if they did not fully understand it. Maya remained exactly the same. Calm, quiet, unhurried. She sat with her hands folded in her lap while Richard considered his options. When he finally moved, she responded almost instantly. The speed was not reckless. It was precise, as though she had already explored every possibility before his hand left the piece. The elderly international master in the front row could barely contain his curiosity. He leaned toward a fellow expert seated beside him. "Do you remember the National Youth Championship in Atlanta 18 years ago?" he whispered. The other man frowned. "The one with the Prodigy?" The international master nodded slowly. Neither said another word. Both returned their attention to Maya. On stage, the game continued. Richard introduced a complex variation designed to test her understanding. Casual players often struggled in these positions because the correct ideas were difficult to recognize. Maya navigated the complications effortlessly. One move, then another, then another. Each choice strengthened her position while quietly limiting Richard's options. A few members of the audience began noticing the electronic evaluation display projected on a large screen behind the stage. Earlier, it had strongly favored the Grandmaster. Now the advantage had narrowed. Most spectators did not understand the numbers, but several competitive players exchanged concerned looks. Something unusual was happening. The Master of Ceremonies attempted a light-hearted joke to keep the atmosphere playful. The audience responded with only scattered laughter. Their attention had become fixed on the board. Richard felt it too. He had played thousands of games throughout his career. He understood the difference between an amateur making lucky moves and a genuinely dangerous opponent. Maya belonged to the second category, yet he could not understand how. Her clothing, her mannerisms, her background, nothing fit the profile of a world-class player. Across the room, whispers began spreading. Some spectators searched tournament databases on their phones. Others tried recalling old chess articles and forgotten championship reports. The mystery surrounding Maya continued growing. Then Richard paused. He stared at the board for nearly 2 full minutes. The ballroom became unusually quiet. Even waitstaff moving between tables slowed their pace. Maya had just played a move that appeared simple on the surface. To trained eyes, however, it revealed extraordinary depth. It was the kind of move strong players admired because it looked obvious only after someone else found it first. Richard leaned back in his chair. For the first time that evening, genuine concern crossed his face. The room noticed. A ripple of anticipation moved through the audience. Maya simply waited. Her expression never changed. She did not appear interested in proving anything. She was only playing chess. But somewhere deep within Richard Sterling's mind, a troubling possibility had begun to form. The woman he had invited onto the stage for amusement might not be an ordinary spectator at all. She might be someone the chess world had forgotten. And if that possibility proved true, then the game unfolding before them was about to become something far more significant than anyone had imagined. As the tension around the board continued to build, the mystery surrounding Maya Carter finally began to reveal itself. Near the front row, the elderly international master could no longer keep his thoughts to himself. "It is her," he whispered. The player beside him looked stunned. "You are sure?" The older man nodded slowly. "I would recognize that style anywhere." Years earlier, long before most people in the ballroom had ever heard Richard Sterling's name, the American chess community had been captivated by a young prodigy from South Carolina. She had entered youth tournaments and defeated players several years older than herself. Coaches described her understanding of strategy as extraordinary. Journalists called her one of the brightest talents of her generation. For a brief period, chess magazines published articles about her remarkable rise. Then, almost as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. Family responsibilities, financial realities, and personal priorities had pulled her away from competitive chess. Over time, new stars emerged. New champions claimed headlines. The chess world moved forward. Most people forgot the young prodigy, but a handful of veteran players never did. Back at the board, Richard studied the position with increasing concentration. The game had entered a phase where experience mattered enormously. Yet somehow every attempt to create pressure seemed to strengthen Maya's position instead. She was not simply defending accurately. She was guiding the game exactly where she wanted it to go. Around the ballroom, spectators sensed the change. Earlier laughter had disappeared completely. The exhibition no longer felt like entertainment. It felt important. Several audience members searched old tournament archives on their phones. One local chess coach suddenly froze while looking at an article from nearly 2 decades earlier. A photograph stared back at him. The resemblance was unmistakable. His eyes widened. "No way," he murmured. Word began spreading quietly through the crowd. Not through announcements. Not through microphones. Through whispers. Through curious glances. Through growing recognition. Maya remained unaware of most of it. Or perhaps she simply did not care. Her attention never left the board. She moved with the same calm precision she had displayed from the beginning. Richard, meanwhile, could no longer ignore what he was feeling. The position in front of him was uncomfortable. Not losing. Not yet. But uncomfortable. The kind of discomfort strong players immediately recognize. Across the board sat someone who understood the game at an elite level. Someone capable of seeing patterns far beyond what casual spectators could appreciate. Then Maya played another move. The electronic evaluation behind them shifted again. Several experts in the audience exchanged startled looks. The advantage had begun leaning toward her side. A hush slowly settled over the ballroom. Even people who knew little about chess could sense they were witnessing something unexpected. The woman who had entered the room as a stranger was becoming the center of attention. Yet the most remarkable part was that Maya never seemed interested in the attention at all. She looked exactly as she had when she walked in carrying her worn tote bag. Humble, quiet, unassuming. The only difference was that now the room was beginning to understand what had been hidden beneath that ordinary appearance all along. And as Richard Sterling stared at the board searching for answers, the forgotten champion of Charleston was quietly reminding everyone why true greatness never needs to announce itself. The atmosphere inside the ballroom had changed so completely that it felt like a different event. Earlier, people had come for entertainment. Now they remained in their seats because they could not look away. Every table had gone quiet. Every conversation had faded. Even the reporters who normally chased dramatic quotes seemed more interested in the chessboard than the headlines. At the center of the room, Maya Carter and Richard Sterling sat beneath the glow of the chandeliers, surrounded by hundreds of watchful eyes. Yet despite all the attention, Maya appeared as calm as ever. She studied the position with quiet focus, occasionally taking a sip of water before returning her attention to the board. Richard, however, looked different. Not defeated, not frustrated, simply concentrated in a way that had not existed at the beginning of the evening. He understood now that this was no exhibition. This was a serious chess game, and serious chess demanded respect. The electronic evaluation display behind them shifted again. Competitive players throughout the room immediately noticed. The advantage remained small, but it continued favoring Maya. One coach quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Another checked the position on his phone to confirm what he was seeing. The result was always the same. Maya's decisions were creating problems that even a grandmaster could not solve easily. Across the ballroom, whispers continued spreading. More people had discovered old articles about the young prodigy from South Carolina. Some found photographs. Others found tournament records. The evidence painted a remarkable picture. Years ago, Maya Carter had defeated nationally ranked youth players with astonishing consistency. Experts had predicted an extraordinary future. Then she had disappeared. Looking at her now, sitting calmly across from one of America's most celebrated grandmasters, the story felt almost unbelievable. Richard leaned forward and made another move. It was ambitious, the kind of move designed to regain momentum and force difficult decisions. Several spectators nodded approvingly. It looked strong. Maya examined the position for less than 30 seconds. Then she responded with a move so natural that many casual viewers missed its significance entirely. A collective reaction rippled through the section occupied by experienced players. One expert quietly shook his head in admiration. Another smiled in disbelief. Maya had not merely answered Richard's idea. She had anticipated it several moves earlier. The realization settled over the room like a slow-moving wave. Richard saw it too. For a moment, he sat perfectly still. His eyes moved across the board, studying every possibility. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. It was not the reaction of a man facing disaster. It was the reaction of a master recognizing another master. Around them, the ballroom remained silent. The master of ceremonies had stopped making jokes. The waitstaff moved carefully between tables. Nobody wanted to interrupt what was unfolding. The game itself had become the entire event. Maya remained composed, her expression unchanged. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply playing the game she loved. Yet with every move, the mystery surrounding her faded and something else emerged in its place. Recognition, respect, understanding. The crowd no longer saw a quiet woman from the back row. They saw someone extraordinary. And as Richard lowered his eyes to the board once more, searching for a path through the increasingly complex position, everyone in the ballroom could feel that the evening was approaching a moment none of them would ever forget. The game had reached the stage where every move carried weight. Casual spectators could no longer follow every strategic detail, but they did not need to. The tension in the room told the story for them. Grandmaster Richard Sterling sat motionless, studying the board with complete concentration. Gone were the playful remarks and easy smiles from earlier in the evening. In their place was the focused expression of a man confronting a challenge he had not expected. Across from him, Maya Carter remained calm. Her posture never changed. Her breathing remained steady. She looked less like someone competing in front of hundreds of people and more like someone enjoying a quiet afternoon game in a neighborhood park. Yet beneath that calm exterior, she was guiding the position with remarkable precision. Several expert players had gathered near the front of the stage. They watched the board with growing fascination. One former state champion quietly pointed toward a cluster of pieces near the center. "Do you see it?" he whispered. Another nodded immediately. "3 moves from now," he replied. Neither man needed to explain further. They had recognized the same pattern. Maya was constructing something subtle, not an obvious attack, not a flashy combination designed to impress spectators. Something far more dangerous. A positional trap. Richard considered a promising continuation. On the surface, it appeared strong. It created pressure and seemed to improve his chances. After several minutes of calculation, he finally made his move. A few spectators applauded softly, assuming the Grandmaster had regained control. Maya glanced at the board. Her eyes moved briefly from one side of the position to the other. Then she made her reply. The move looked ordinary, almost disappointing. Several audience members exchanged confused looks. But among the experts, reactions were immediate. One coach quietly laughed in disbelief. Another shook his head and covered his mouth. They understood what had happened. Maya had just transformed Richard's apparent opportunity into a long-term weakness. The trap was now fully set. Richard did not notice it immediately. Few players would have. The danger was hidden beneath layers of strategic complexity. For several moves, everything appeared balanced. The Grandmaster continued pressing forward. Maya continued responding with quiet accuracy. Yet with each exchange, the position shifted slightly further in her favor. The audience sensed it before they understood it. A strange feeling spread through the ballroom. Anticipation. The sensation that something significant was approaching. Reporters stopped typing and simply watched. The master of ceremonies stood silently near the edge of the stage. Even the hotel staff seemed drawn toward the board. Then Richard reached for a piece and paused. His hand hovered above the board. His eyes narrowed. For the first time all evening, genuine surprise appeared on his face. He leaned closer, studied the position again. Then again. Several seconds passed. The room remained completely silent. Finally, he sat back in his chair. He had seen it. The trap Maya began building many moves earlier had become impossible to ignore. Every promising continuation now led to the same uncomfortable conclusion. The initiative he thought he possessed had never truly been his. Maya had guided him exactly where she wanted him to go. Across the board, she waited patiently. Not proud, not triumphant, simply calm. The forgotten prodigy from South Carolina had spent the entire game thinking several moves ahead. And now, for the first time that evening, Richard Sterling understood that he was no longer trying to win. He was trying to survive a position created by a master. Richard Sterling stared at the board as though it had become a language he suddenly no longer understood. The position in front of him was not chaotic. It was not dramatic. In fact, to most spectators, it looked almost ordinary. Yet every serious player in the ballroom knew exactly what they were witnessing. Maya Carter had constructed a position of remarkable elegance. Every piece worked together. Every square mattered. Every possible escape route had quietly disappeared. Richard examined one variation, then another, then a third. Each calculation ended in the same place. A slightly worse position. A lost advantage. A future that grew more difficult with every move. Across from him, Maya waited patiently. She never rushed him. She never smiled. She never celebrated. The atmosphere around her remained unchanged. Calm, respectful, focused. Around the ballroom, nobody spoke above a whisper. The electronic evaluation display now showed a clear advantage for Maya. Several reporters looked at one another in disbelief. A local chess coach slowly removed his glasses and shook his head. "I cannot believe what we are watching," he whispered. Near the front row, the elderly international master folded his arms and smiled softly. For him, the mystery was gone. He knew exactly who Maya was. The rest of the room was only beginning to catch up. Richard finally made his move. It was accurate, strong, the best option available. Yet the moment his hand left the piece, Maya responded. Not after 5 minutes. Not after 2 minutes. Almost immediately. The speed of her decision sent another wave of surprise through the audience. She had anticipated the move long before it appeared on the board. Richard looked down. Then he looked again. The realization slowly settled across his face. Maya had not simply answered his idea. She had predicted it several turns earlier. The room grew even quieter. A hush fell over the ballroom. Cameras remained frozen. Pins stopped moving. Even the chandeliers seemed to hang motionless above the crowd. The game continued for several more moves. Each one brought the same result. Richard searched for opportunities. Maya calmly removed them. Richard looked for complications. Maya simplified them. Piece by piece, option by option, she guided the game toward an ending only she seemed to understand completely. Then it happened. Maya reached forward and made a move so simple that several casual spectators almost missed it. There was no dramatic gesture, no sudden announcement, just the quiet placement of a single piece. Richard immediately froze. His eyes locked onto the board. 1 second passed, then 5, then 10. Slowly, he leaned forward. The position revealed itself with absolute clarity. Every variation failed. Every resource disappeared. Every defense arrived one move too late. For the first time all evening, Richard Sterling did not look like a grandmaster performing before an audience. He looked like a student discovering something extraordinary. The room went silent. Completely silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The realization spread from player to player, table to table, row to row. Maya's final idea had been hidden in plain sight the entire time. It was not flashy. It was not complicated. It was simply brilliant. Richard stared at the board for several more moments before slowly lifting his eyes toward Maya. Across the stage, she met his gaze with the same quiet composure she had carried from the beginning. In that instant, every person in the ballroom understood they had just witnessed something unforgettable. Not merely a strong chess game. Not merely an upset. They had witnessed greatness reveal itself without warning. And for a few remarkable seconds, the entire room could do nothing except sit in stunned silence. For several long seconds, nobody in the Charleston ballroom spoke. The silence carried a different weight now. Earlier in the evening, it had been the silence of curiosity. Now it was the silence of realization. Grandmaster Richard Sterling looked down at the board one final time before slowly extending his hand across the table. Maya Carter accepted it with the same calm grace she had shown from the moment she walked onto the stage. There was no celebration, no triumphant speech, no attempt to draw attention to herself. The audience watched in complete stillness as Richard nodded respectfully. That was extraordinary, he said quietly. The microphone near the table captured every word. A ripple moved through the room. For the first time all evening, the famous Grandmaster was not addressing Maya as an amused spectator. He was addressing her as an equal. Then something remarkable happened. One person began clapping, then another, then another. Within moments, the entire ballroom rose to its feet. The standing ovation seemed to roll through the room like a wave. Reporters applauded. Tournament officials applauded. Competitive players applauded. Even people who barely understood chess found themselves standing. They knew they had witnessed something special. Maya looked genuinely surprised by the reaction. She offered a modest smile and thanked the audience with a small nod. Nothing about her suggested she had expected recognition. Across the stage, Richard remained standing. I think many of us owe you an apology, he said. A few nervous laughs drifted through the crowd. Richard smiled slightly. Including me. The honesty of the statement earned another round of applause. Near the front row, the elderly international master finally approached the stage. I knew I recognized you, he said warmly. The Prodigy from Atlanta. Maya laughed softly. That was a long time ago. Not for those of us who remember, he replied. Around them, conversations erupted as people shared old articles, tournament records, and memories they had uncovered throughout the match. The mystery had finally been solved. Yet somehow the truth felt even more impressive than the rumors. Maya had never disappeared because she failed. She had simply chosen a different life. A quieter life. A life that did not require trophies to feel meaningful. Later that evening, after photographs were taken and interviews concluded, Maya stepped outside the hotel, carrying the same worn tote bag she had arrived with. The cool South Carolina air greeted her as she walked toward the parking lot. Inside the ballroom, people continued discussing the game. Videos were already spreading online. Articles were being written. Analysts were replaying the critical moments move by move. But Maya seemed untouched by the attention. She unlocked her aging sedan and placed her bag on the passenger seat. Before getting inside, she paused for a moment and looked back toward the glowing hotel windows. Somewhere beyond those walls, people were celebrating an extraordinary performance. Maya simply smiled and climbed into her car. The next morning, she would return to the community library. She would help visitors find books. She would organize shelves. She would continue living the life she loved. And that night, everyone in Charleston learned a lesson they would not soon forget. Greatness does not always arrive wearing a title. It does not always seek attention. Sometimes it sits quietly in the back row, waiting for the world to notice what was there all along.